Once upon a time, there was a company that was mentioned briefly in Matt's slides as well, called Oculus Rift. Oculus Rift was a startup company, technology company, that developed a 3D virtual reality headset. The Oculus Rift team needed money. They needed capital. And they went to all the traditional sources of capital, the venture capital funds, the corporate investors, the super angels, but nobody would invest in Oculus Rift. They didn't believe in the product, they didn't believe in the team, they didn't believe in the market, whatever it was, they couldn't raise capital. But little Oculus Rift didn't give up, and it went to a non-traditional source of capital. It went to a platform called Kickstarter. This was in 2012. Kickstarter is a reward-based crowdfunding platform. And Oculus Rift tried to raise $250,000. And it succeeded. 9,500 people, 9,500 individuals gave Oculus Rift money. And they raised nearly $2.5 million back in 2012. Oculus Rift now had money to invest in their R&D and their technology, to build up towards almost a year later, successfully raising a Series B round of investment from those traditional sources of capital. They raised $75 million. Those 9,500 people that participated in the Kickstarter campaign gave the Oculus Rift team life, gave the company life, and enabled them to develop the technology and reach some traction enough to justify or to achieve an investment from the traditional sources of capital. The contribution of the crowdfunding campaign was more than just the money that the Oculus Rift team was able to raise. It was the validation. What those venture capital funds saw was that 9,500 people were willing to give of their own money towards a product that wasn't even around yet. That was market validation that there is actually interest in the product that Oculus Rift was trying to develop. The way the campaign worked was these 9,500 people, most of them received something in return for their contribution, a t-shirt. People at the time, it was very, people were talking about it. They walked around with it proudly, wearing the t-shirts. It was a sign of, I'm involved in something innovative, I'm involved in something new. I funded that campaign of Oculus Rift that everybody was talking about. Crowdfunding is a powerful tool. In 2011, $1.5 billion were raised in crowdfunding campaigns. In 2014, $10 billion. Some estimates say that the market will get to over $1 trillion. There were over 500 platforms available in 2012. I mentioned the largest rounds on Kickstarter, Pebblewatch, the first one and the second one currently still going on. 60% of the campaigns happen in the States, over 30% in Europe, and 4% in the rest of the world. I think we belong in the rest of the world. I in Israel, and you in Australia, and Hong Kong, and all the rest of the countries that I've met people here from. Are you a part of it? Clap your hands like this. But wait, clap your hands like this if you have never participated in a crowdfunding campaign. Clap your hands like this if you have participated in a crowdfunding campaign. It's pretty equal, but it does sound like there are more people here that did participate, and that's really exciting to hear, especially in a room like this that is gathered here to talk about innovation and creativity. And yet I was just discussing in the break with Dawn that the Australian government is aware of the potential in crowdfunding and is currently working on the regulatory environment and a regulatory framework that will enable crowdfunding. I think we're probably still a ways away. There's definitely an active debate going on, but governments are recognizing the power of crowdfunding as well. What is crowdfunding? In short, there are three main types of crowdfunding. The first is like Kickstarter, reward-based. Individuals participate in a campaign, in a fundraising campaign, in return for something that shows that they participated. A t-shirt, a mug, a selfie in space. The second type of crowdfunding is donation-based. Individuals have the opportunity to participate in a charitable cause, in giving donations towards a charitable cause. The third type of crowdfunding, which I represent and I'm here to talk about, is equity crowdfunding. Equity crowdfunding enables individuals to participate in a round of investment. They contribute capital towards a campaign, towards an investment round, in return for ownership in the company, in return for equity. OurCrowd, the equity crowdfunding platform I am a general partner at, is the largest platform in the world of equity crowdfunding. We've been around for 2 years, invested in 61 companies. Over $110 million were invested through OurCrowd, by the crowd in these companies. But that's not the end of the Oculus Rift story. The Oculus Rift story continued to succeed, and about a year after the $75 million investment round, Oculus Rift was bought out by Google for $2 billion. The founders made money, the investors made money. The only people who didn't make money were the 9,500 people that gave Oculus Rift life. All they got was a t-shirt. At OurCrowd, we believe, and I believe, that when you give a company money, you're an investor. And when the founders and the owners make money, you should make money. And equity crowdfunding means investing via crowdfunding. I'd like to tell you about a company that OurCrowd invested in. The company is called Rewalk, an Israeli technology company founded by an Israeli scientist called Dr. Amit Gofel. You can see Dr. Gofel seated in the wheelchair on the side of the picture. He invented an exoskeleton, a device that enables paraplegics to walk. Paraplegics like Teresa and Radi, who are demonstrating the Rewalk to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the US President Barack Obama. This is what Rewalk does. One of the Rewalkers that you saw in the video walked the entire London Marathon. Radi, who you saw in the picture before, I actually forgot to mention that Teresa and Radi are both war veterans. Radi is a veteran of the Israeli army and Teresa of the US Army. Radi walked a 10-kilometer using the Rewalk. Around the time that the technology was demonstrated to President Obama in that slide that I showed earlier, the company raised a second round of, or actually I'm not sure if it was a second, but a subsequent round of capital, and it was an internal round, which means that it was only open to existing investors. OurCrowd heard of the round going on and managed to succeeded in securing allocation for OurCrowd investors in that investment round. So 57 people participated in this round of investment from 9 different countries. An average of around $20,000, $23,000 was invested by each one, for a total of over $1 million invested in ReWalk. A few months later, a giant robotics distribution company called Yaskawa invested in the company. A strategic investor came in with a $10 million investment. And a few months after that, about a year after this round of the 57 people, ReWalk raised an additional round of capital. OurCrowd was able to participate as well. About 150 new investors came in. We invested at this time also, I think, over $2 million in that subsequent round. And altogether, 100 people participated via OurCrowd in this round of investment in ReWalk. It's important to understand that equity crowdfunding gave these individuals the opportunity to invest, to participate in an investment round that they would not have had access to otherwise. That up until this age of equity crowdfunding, these investment rounds were closed to the venture capital funds and the corporate investors and a small number of super angels or super well-connected angel investors. ReWalk went on a few months later to be the first equity crowdfunded company to IPO on NASDAQ, which is quite an achievement. The 200 people that invested in the company via OurCrowd received their shares 2 weeks ago, literally. Company IPO'd. Founders made money. Dr. Amit Goffer, whom you saw in the picture, the investors made money, and so did the people who participated in the crowdfunding round. They were investors too, and they made money. But equity crowdfunding brings more value than just to the investor in the story. Equity crowdfunding brings tremendous value to the entrepreneur. And I was actually just talking to an entrepreneur from here, from Australia, on the break, who came to talk to me about the dilemma if to try and raise capital here in Australia or to move to California, where he was certain that he would be successful in raising money. In my original plan for this presentation, I was going to say, now imagine the brilliant scientist, imagine the brilliant engineer that lives in a small town somewhere in the world, but actually he made the job easier for me. I don't know where you are and where you live, but I assume you live in a well-populated city in Australia if you made it to this conference. And most entrepreneurs don't have access, don't have immediate, easy access to capital, to people who will contribute the capital needed for their investment. We talk about friends and family rounds, but that's not enough. And some of the greatest ideas in the world are not coming to life because the people behind them just can't succeed in raising the money to take off. But equity crowdfunding connects between the entrepreneur and the world. OurCrowd has investors from nearly 120 countries. Let me tell you about another company in the OurCrowd portfolio, a company called Abe's Market, also an Israeli company. Abe's Market is the premier online marketplace for health and wellness products health and organic products in the US. It's an Israeli company that targeted the US market and is today the premier marketplace. OurCrowd invested in the company, a few dozen investors participated, and one of the investors thought it would be a good idea to make an introduction between a friend of his and the founders of the company. His friend happens to run a successful private equity fund in New York. Remember, the founders are based in Jerusalem. This friend runs a successful private equity fund in New York that invests in consumer brands. Thought there would be good synergy between the brands, many of which are health-oriented, to find a place on Abe's Market. And there were synergies. There were so many synergies that this private equity fund led a subsequent round of investment and put $10 million into the company. That's tremendous value add by the platform. And think about all the other investors who participated silently in the investment round via OurCrowd. Everyone benefited from this one investor who had a connection. And the connection was not just to capital. The private equity fund also worked with Abe's Market founders to identify an additional source of revenue that they hadn't thought of before, and it turned out to be very lucrative. Today, a year later, it's very valuable. The value of the crowd to the entrepreneur is tremendous. And the equity crowdfunding is the difference between managing your company with a great management team and managing your company with a great management team and a network of thousands of investors around you who are ready to help. They're ready to contribute capital, but they're also ready to contribute of their knowledge, their expertise, their experience, their network. They can provide a lot of added value to the entrepreneur. And that is what is so brilliant about this whole world, the power of the crowd. Crowdfunding frees us from the limitations of ourselves, of our knowledge, of our skills, of our expertise, of our teams. It gives access to a tremendous crowd of people who have even more. If you leverage the crowd of thousands of people correctly, the value is exponential to the entrepreneur, and that is where the value comes and essentially breaks down the limitations of the traditional structures of financial investment. It goes way beyond the traditional investment teams that the entrepreneurs had access to prior to this. And I know a thing or two about breaking beyond limitations because I come from a small country called Israel that is blessed with many natural limitations. We're limited in natural resources, and we're limited in the size of the market. We don't have very many trade relationships with our neighboring countries. We don't have a regional market. We have a domestic market, and it's very small. But innovation drove Israel's growth to a strong and stable economy and to be a global player. Today on NASDAQ, Israel is the third country in terms of number of companies listed on NASDAQ. It comes after the US and after China. Israel has the population of 8 million people. And in the same way that innovation drove Israel to succeed beyond its traditional and natural limitations, crowdfunding enables financial investments to go beyond the limitations. And it's not just about investing in innovation, because equity crowdfunding can enable you to invest in anything. We're just used to associating it with technology and startups because it is something so innovative and so new. But equity crowdfunding is about more than investing in innovation. It's actually the innovation in investment. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Danna.